It happened behind the veil of the most sacred silence in the galaxy, an act so profane, so cosmically implausible, that even the Inquisition dared not speak its name aloud. Somewhere within the walls of the Imperial Palace, or perhaps beneath the cloaked bastions of Titan, a custodian fell by the hand of the Grey Knights. Not in battle, not in betrayal, but by execution, deliberate, sanctioned, swift. And then, like a breath drawn too deep, the event was buried. The records sealed, the witnesses erased. Only echoes remain, in broken litanies, in forbidden dreams, and in the haunted eyes of psychers who dared probe too close. To strike down a custodian is to plunge a blade into the heart of the Imperium itself. But to do so as a Grey Knight, the Emperor's most incorruptible champions, is to suggest that something so dark, so terrifying, had taken root in one of the Emperor's own golden wardens that death was not only justified, but mandatory. It was not war. It was not justice. It was something far worse, necessity. And necessity, in the grim darkness of the far future, is the most damning truth of all. The Adeptus Custodes are not warriors. They are not soldiers. They are living relics, sanctified expressions of the Emperor's divine will. Each one is a cathedral of flesh, engineered beyond mortal comprehension, honed for centuries, and steeped in a spiritual devotion so profound that even space marines seem faithless in comparison. They do not serve a cause. They are the cause. Their mere existence is the Imperium's final argument against the end, a constant, silent declaration that the Emperor still watches, still judges, still protects. To understand the magnitude of a custodian's death by execution, not on the battlefield, but by the hands of his own, one must first comprehend their role in the cosmic order. They are not expendable assets. They are irreplaceable truths. Each custodian is personally crafted from the Emperor's gene alchemy, imbued with knowledge and war skill passed down through unbroken tradition, and elevated to a status that is as much spiritual as it is martial. They stand not merely as bodyguards, but as high priests in armor, custodians, in the truest sense, of the master of mankind's physical and psychic form. For over 10,000 years, they have watched him rot and breathe and shine in silence. They do not falter. They do not turn. Even the whisper of corruption among them is unthinkable, and not only because of the physical perfection they embody, but because their will is seen as unimpeachable. While Astartes may rebel, may fracture into 1,000 heresies, or fall to the promises of the warp, the Custodes endure as a golden line drawn in eternity. They do not follow orders blindly, for their charge is not to any man, not even to the High Lords of Terra, but to the Emperor himself. Their interpretation of his will is personal, sacred, and absolute. So when one falls to an executioner's hand, it is not just a body that dies. It is a piece of the Emperor's sacred architecture that is shattered. It is a theological earthquake. The very foundation of loyalist myth trembles. The Adeptus Custodes are more than warriors. They are icons. To destroy one is to desecrate a relic. To justify such a thing, even by the most incorruptible hands, requires a reason that brushes against the metaphysical. Their presence alone alters the gravity of any room they enter. Even inquisitors tread carefully around them, measuring words with the delicacy of a scribe before a living god statue. They are judge, jury, and executioner on Terra. Their word can overrule all but the Emperor's silence. Their armor is not just golden. It is ceremonial, enshrined in relics and litanies, bearing the weight of millennia of devotion. Every scar on a custodian's flesh is a holy glyph. Every blade they carry is not a weapon, but an oath made manifest. So how then could any force, any entity, even dare to lift a blade against such a being, let alone strike true? How does one measure the guilt necessary to make such a strike not only possible, but imperative? The implications tear at the spiritual logic of the Imperium itself. If even one custodian could fall, could be judged, could be executed, what then remains sacred? What then remains uncorrupted? That is the tragedy of this nameless execution. It is not just the death of a warrior, but the death of certainty. It whispers of cracks beneath the surface of the Golden Palace, of secrets so vile they are better left unknown. It challenges the last remaining absolute in a galaxy of doubt. And in doing so, it begs a question few dare ask aloud. If a custodian can be executed, who among us can claim true purity? The Grey Knights are not merely Astartes. They are a myth made flesh, a lie so absolute that it becomes truth. Born in secret from the hidden vaults of the Emperor's final vision, they stand apart from every other force in the galaxy, untainted by history, unbent by politics, unseen even by their brothers in arms. To most, they are a name whispered in times of psychic disaster, a rumor spoken with reverent fear by those who survive warp incursions. But for those who know the truth, they are the Imperium's scalpel, cutting not just through flesh, but through the very soul of corruption. What sets the Grey Knights apart is not their power, though they are among the most formidable warriors ever conceived. It is not their psychic prowess, their relentless discipline, or their unshakable will. It is their permission. They are permitted to do what others cannot, to see what others must not, to destroy what others would weep to comprehend. Their loyalty is not to the High Lords, nor to any order of the Inquisition, not even to the Adeptus Terra. Their loyalty is to purity itself, to the conceptual ideal of the Emperor's unspoiled light. And for that ideal, they will burn entire worlds. To become a Grey Knight is to be forged in psychic fire. Every one of them is a psyker. Everyone has been tested against the warp itself. They are not recruited, they are chosen. Often from among orphans who display not only psychic talent, but the intangible spark of incorruptibility. They are remade on Titan, beneath the shadowed vaults of the moon that does not exist, trained in absolute secrecy by masters who have long since sacrificed their names to duty. They bear no heraldry save their own. Their names are often erased upon death. Even among the Inquisition, only the Ordo Malleus can request their presence, and even then, a request is not a command. They are not tools of policy, they are executors of necessity, and their methods reflect this brutal clarity. To cleanse a taint, they will raise a hive city. To contain a psychic breach, they will shatter the minds of all who witnessed it. They are the only Astartes permitted to wield demon weapons, not out of trust, but because they are built to resist the corrupting whisper. Even their gene seed is unique, drawn from the Emperor himself, or so the legends claim. And if that myth is true, then every Grey Knight is a shard of the divine will, an echo of divinity clad in silver. This makes the execution of a custodian by their hand all the more unfathomable. For them to act, there must have been corruption, not merely failure or doubt, but true soul-deep corruption, the kind that cannot be cleansed, the kind that cannot be contained. To strike down a fellow servant of the Emperor, especially one as exalted as a custodian, suggests that whatever befell that golden warrior was so absolute, so irrevocable, that death was the only mercy possible, not only for the custodian, but for the galaxy. And the Grey Knights, for all their purity, are not without sorrow. Their lives are steeped in mourning. They do not revel in battle, they endure it. Every engagement is a tragedy, every victory a scar. To be a Grey Knight is to live with the weight of all that must be hidden, all that must be erased. And so, to be ordered, or to decide, to execute a custodian, a creature of divine perfection, would be a wound upon the very soul of their brotherhood. It is no wonder, then, that the records were sealed, that no name was recorded, that no ceremony was held. It was not justice. It was not vengeance. It was the fulfillment of their ultimate charter, to preserve the sanctity of the Imperium, even if that sanctity must be protected from itself. They did not act out of pride or wrath or fear. They acted because they alone could, and perhaps because they alone must. There are whispers, faint as starlight behind a black hole, of a custodian who spoke a name not meant to be known. A name not in defiance, not in blasphemy, but in desperate comprehension. He had seen something, touched something. Perhaps it had not even been his fault. A failed exorcism near the palace walls, an encounter with a shard of forgotten knowledge, a glance too long into the light of the Astronomicon where something blinked back. That is the root of the theory, the poison at its core, that this custodian, unshakable and sacred, had been touched, not possessed, not bent to a demon's will. No, that would be too easy, too crude. The Astartes fall that way. This was more insidious, a taint not of body, but of understanding. A moment where he saw too far, thought too deeply, opened a psychic aperture that could not be closed. A moment of clarity that was, in the universe of the Imperium, a heresy in itself. It is said the Adeptus Custodes are immune to corruption, but what if the Emperor's own genetic perfection was not protection against ideas? The warp does not always come as fire and fangs. Sometimes it comes as insight, as a sudden knowledge that your entire purpose is built on a premise too fragile to bear the weight of truth. What if this custodian, in performing his endless vigil, looked upon the Emperor and understood something no mortal should? What if that understanding spread? Such a risk could not be allowed to bloom. The theory goes that the custodian began speaking in ways that unsettled even his brothers. He began asking questions, not loudly, not arrogantly, but with quiet precision. Questions about the Emperor's silence, about the nature of the throne, about the soul of mankind. He was isolated, observed, then, perhaps, confronted. The Silent Sisters may have been summoned, not to suppress him, but to verify what they could not smell, but could feel, a conceptual fracture in his purity. This would have been unbearable. Not only was a custodian now infected with metaphysical uncertainty, but his words, his doubts, could spread like a mimetic plague. The danger wasn't that he would turn traitor. It was that others might begin to think. And that is why, if the Grey Knights were summoned, it was not to kill a traitor. It was to euthanize a fallen ideal, to act as the Emperor's scalpel where even the Custodes could not wield the blade. Perhaps the Custodes themselves demanded it, a penance, a necessity they could not commit with their own hands. Or perhaps they refused, and the Ordo Malleus overruled them in secret, executing the sentence in shadow to prevent division. There is an even darker theory, one so blasphemous it exists only in hidden texts, preserved in stasis-sealed archives beneath the inquisitorial fortress on Nemesis Tessera, that the custodian did not speak lies, that what he had seen was true, and that the truth was not survivable. If this was so, then the execution was not a matter of duty. It was a containment measure, not of a man, but of an idea, of a revelation, one that could not be unlearned, one that threatened the very metaphysics of the Imperium's divine structure. And so, the theory ends with silence. No names, no records. Just a psychic ripple felt only by the most sensitive astropaths, like a sudden scream from terror that echoed out into the void and was never heard again. A golden figure silenced forever. A soul unmade not for what it did, but for what it knew. Beneath the gleaming spires and gilded frescoes of the Imperial Palace lies a darker world, a labyrinth of passageways, data cathedrals, and oubliettes designed not just to protect the Emperor, but to defend reality itself from what cannot be known. Here, among the vaults and null chambers, the true face of Terra is hidden. This is not the realm of saints and bureaucrats. It is the realm of shadow operatives, kill teams, and silence. And within that shadow, the Adeptus Custodes do not stand alone. For every visible custodian that walks the halls of Terra, there are 3 whose names have never been recorded. These are the eyes of the throne, the silent vigilants who go where diplomacy cannot, who act where war would be too loud. Operating beyond the ceremonial duties, they engage in the rarest and most critical interventions, often under the oversight of the Inquisition or the High Lords themselves. They eliminate threats before those threats even know they exist. Assassinations, deniable operations, internal purges, all conducted within the heart of the Imperium's sanctified soil. This is not the Imperium most know. It is the Imperium behind the curtain, a place where loyalty is measured not in words, but in silence. In this realm, the Grey Knights are not alien. They are kin. Terra's Shadow War is a dance of psychic precision, of impossible judgment, and of loyalty measured against the highest spiritual stakes. The Custodes, for all their grandeur, are not immune to scrutiny in this place. Even they can become liabilities. And in such cases, there are protocols. There have long been rumors of so-called silent trials, proceedings held not in courtrooms, but in null chambers deep beneath the throne. Trials where the accused speaks no words, where judgment is passed by the unspoken agreement of those who know. Evidence is not shared, only felt. Verdicts are not announced, only enforced. These trials are said to be held for those whose sins are conceptual, who have come too close to a forbidden truth, who have faltered in the spiritual trust placed upon them. Some say the executed custodian was brought to one such place. Imagine the scene: a null space chamber, drained of all warp resonance, the very air silent as the void. No chants, no prayers, just the presence of those who must decide. A silent sisterhood representative, a Grey Knight Justicar, perhaps even a representative of the Ordo Malleus, and the custodian himself, armored still, not in defiance but in dignity. He does not beg. He does not resist. He waits. In such a place, words are meaningless. The question is not whether he acted in treason, but whether his continued existence endangers the soul of the Imperium. And if the answer is yes, the sentence is not pronounced. It is performed. There are signs that such a framework has precedent: the assassination of rogue inquisitors, the silent purging of entire archivist sects, even the psychic sterilization of entire precincts within the Librarius Mechanicum. The Imperium is no stranger to turning its blade inward, not in vengeance, but in grim calculus. When secrets threaten the Foundation, when purity is compromised beyond repair, the Shadow must act, no matter how golden the target. And so, in this fan-theorized chain of events, the custodian's death was not an anomaly. It was a deeply buried extension of existing protocols. He was not a traitor. He was not a rebel. He was simply no longer safe. And in a realm where safety is defined by the preservation of sacred order, his death was as logical as it was horrifying. There are no commemorations for such acts, no statues, no martyrs, only absence. A name erased from the rolls, a face forgotten by even the servitors that maintained his war gear. Only the smell of ozone in a null chamber, the brief glint of a silver blade in the dark, and a silence so profound that even the warp held its breath. There is a phenomenon known only to the most sensitive of psychers, an emotional echo, a trace of psychic trauma so potent it leaves imprints in the warp itself. It is not a sound, but a feeling, a pressure in the back of the soul. And once, perhaps only once, it was felt radiating from Terra, spreading like a silent shriek across the immaterium before vanishing entirely. That moment, barely recorded, mostly dismissed, is often whispered about in the forbidden enclaves of astropaths and sanctioned seers. They call it the psychic storm of the throne. No official record remains. No astropathic choir dares speak of it openly. But there are clues. In a single night, 12 navigators across Segmentum Solar reportedly went blind. A choir in the Scholastica Psychana collapsed mid-liturgy, every member weeping blood. One inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, known only as Catheron, vanished without a trace after sending a single word in cipher: judgment. These incidents, spread thinly across the void, are rarely connected in official documents, but to those who know where to look, the timing is too precise to ignore. It is in these whisper threads, that we find the raw material of theory. The idea that the custodian's death, the execution, sent out more than a ripple, that it was not a clean kill, but a psychic fracture. The Custodes are not mere warriors. They are psychically null to a degree that defies charting. To kill one, especially under specific metaphysical circumstances, could release a shockwave, a backlash of severed loyalty, broken oaths, and psychic energy that had been bound for millennia. Some suggest it was not the death itself that caused the storm, but the manner of it. If the custodian had been possessed, not in the crude sense, but by a fragment of something impossible, then his death may have been a forced exorcism, the violent rupture of a tether between soul and corruption. In such a scenario, the Grey Knight's strike would not have merely slain a man, but broken a psychic seal, and whatever was bound within him, information, emotion, essence, screamed out as it died. Others go further. There are claims that during the same time, the Emperor's Astronomicon dimmed for nearly 13 minutes, an event so rare, so destabilizing, that it was covered up by the Chartist guilds under fear of mass panic. The Mechanicus has quietly acknowledged a fluctuation in the throne's core outputs. Minor, they claim, statistical noise. But the coincidence draws speculation like blood draws demons. Rogue scholars and excommunicated librarians have pieced together what they call the Veiled Day, a 24-hour period in Imperial records where dozens of Terra's highest-grade surveillance systems returned encrypted null data. No admittance logs, no off-world communications, no cogitator entries. A day of silence so complete that it could only have been imposed by the Inquisition or the Custodes themselves. Perhaps both. What truly occurred in that window will never be known. But the theories agree on one thing. It was not surgical. It was traumatic. A soul was unmade with such force that the warp itself recoiled. The Emperor did not speak, but perhaps, just perhaps, he stirred. Witness accounts, if you believe them, are few and broken. A rogue navigator under chemical regression therapy muttered of a golden tower cracked by silver blades. An astropath exiled to the edge of the Segmentum Pacificus described a thought so loud it broke time. One inquisitorial savant drew a sigil of a custodian helm split in two by a crescent sword, a drawing later found burned into her skin from the inside. None of these are proof. All are hearsay. But in the grim darkness of the far future, truth is not what is written. It is what is buried. And the warp remembers everything. It is said that the Emperor speaks through silence, that his will is not uttered but revealed in moments of profound stillness through the actions of those who serve. So when the blade was lifted against the custodian, that singular, terrible instant, no words were spoken, no litany invoked, only silence. And in that silence, a blade fell. The ritual itself, if it existed, would have been unlike any other in Imperial history. A rite not of penance or punishment, but of pure containment, a psychic and metaphysical excision. The Grey Knights do not kill with rage. They do not strike with emotion. Their swords are sheathed in purpose, and that purpose is the Emperor's will made manifest. So when the blade pierced the custodian's heart, if indeed that is how he died, it did so with the weight of an entire galaxy's worth of dread pressing on its hilt. The question of who carried out the execution is almost sacrilegious. Was it a single Grey Knight, chosen by lot or by burden? A Justicar, perhaps, marked by fate or vision? Or was it a squad, moving as one, each bearing the shared weight of an unthinkable task? The notion of a strike team sent not to battle a demon, but to end the life of one of the Emperor's chosen, is so paradoxical that it shatters the very rules of narrative within the Imperium. There is a theory, whispered only in the most forbidden vaults of forbidden vaults, that the blade used was not a normal nemesis weapon, that it was something older, something forged during the Great Crusade and sealed beneath Titan, reserved only for this exact kind of task, a sword that bore no name, only function. a blade unmarked by sigils because its purpose was so sacred, so blasphemous, that even litanies would have been an insult. Imagine the act, the custodian kneeling, not bound, not pleading, accepting. Perhaps he understood what he had become. Perhaps he requested it. A silent understanding passing between him and the gray night before him. No hatred, no fear, only necessity. The room is dark, null lit. The silence is so complete it hums. And then, one stroke, clean, absolute, not just death, but obliteration. The severing of soul from body. The erasure of something wholly made perilous. But even more haunting than the act is what happened next. There was no ceremony, no rites of remembrance. The Grey Knights do not keep trophies. They do not mark their kills when the kill itself is a sin against knowing. The armor of the custodian would have been destroyed, not dismantled, unmade. His name would have been stripped from the rolls of the 10,000. Perhaps a false record created, a death in battle, a vanishing in the web of the imperial bureaucracy, or nothing at all. Some believe his corpse was not buried, that it could not be, that whatever was left after the execution had to be interred in a stasis tomb sealed in psychic wards and surrounded by anathema circuits. A coffin not to honor the dead, but to prevent his death from echoing forever. That this tomb rests somewhere beneath the throne, guarded not by men, but by machines too ancient to name. And the Emperor? Did he feel it? The Custodes believe their master knows all, that every heartbeat, every breath, every oath is recorded in his divine consciousness. If that is so, then he knew what occurred. He allowed it, or worse, he ordered it in ways too subtle to be understood. A twitch in the Astronomicon, a flicker in the soul of a gray night, a dream sent through the veil. The act, then, was not a rebellion. It was obedience of the most terrifying kind, and the silence that followed, not just from Terra but from the Emperor himself, was his judgment, or perhaps his grief. If there is one thing the Imperium has perfected, it is the art of forgetting. To seal away truth so utterly that it might as well have never existed. That is not merely policy, it is doctrine. And when the unthinkable occurred, the execution of a custodian by the hands of the Grey Knights, the only response acceptable to the machinery of the Imperium was erasure, not denial, not obfuscation, obliteration. Such an event could not be recorded, not because it lacked witnesses, but because the act of recording it would grant it form, and form invites memory, and memory invites replication. So it was not merely hidden, it was consigned, declared so dangerous to the collective spiritual architecture of the Imperium that the Ordo Malleus itself moved to shroud it in layers of oblivion so dense they might as well be temporal. In theory, the Ordo Malleus has this power. Among the three branches of the Inquisition, they are the most intimately entwined with the warp, the most trusted with truths that should not exist. They do not simply destroy demons, they destroy the evidence of demons. They burn thoughts, they unmake knowledge, they perform psychic lobotomies on entire planets, and for something as monstrous as this, a custodian undone by purity itself, they would stop at nothing. The sealing would not be a bureaucratic act. It would be a ritual, codified, performed in secrecy, perhaps deep in the vaults of the Conclave Obscura. A conclave of inquisitors, Grey Knights, perhaps even members of the Ordo Redactus, the ghost archivists who exist to unwrite history. Together they would conduct a rite of negation, a psychic purging not of people but of fact, the name of the custodian, the names of those involved, the time, the location, burned from the lexicon of existence. Librarium servers would be wiped, chronologs scrambled, adepts who handled the data exposed to blank field psychers and subjected to memory filtration. Some, those who saw too much, would be executed, their souls fed into containment grids to prevent psychic residue from drifting into the warp. Witnesses among the lower ranks, mind scrubbed or lobotomized. A A few might have been turned into servitors, a mercy compared to the alternative. The High Lords of Terra would not be told, or more chillingly, they would be told just enough to know not to ask further. The Emperor's will had been enacted. That would be enough. And the Custodes? Did they resist this erasure? Did they demand accountability, retribution, clarity? No, they complied. Or so the theory goes. That the 10,000, as shocked and shamed by the event as anyone, agreed to the seal. Perhaps not all of them. Perhaps there were schisms, quiet disputes in golden halls, looks exchanged behind masks of unity. But officially, they let it happen. Because to speak of the death was to spread the taint. Because silence was the only loyalty left. So the records were buried. Some say a single codex remains, encrypted, stored beneath Titan in a vault labeled only as Absolutum 17B. It is rumored to be psychically keyed to the soul of the Grand Master of the Grey Knights and to open only upon his death. Others believe there is no record at all, only a hole in the data, a perfect absence in a place where something should be. The cost of this kind of secrecy is profound, not just in data, but in faith. For in hiding this truth, the Imperium declared that even its holiest defenders are not beyond suspicion, that there is no act so sacred it cannot be turned to heresy by proximity, and that perhaps the greatest threat to the Imperium is not chaos or Xenos, but the knowledge of its own fragility. It is a reminder, buried and forgotten, that the Imperium is not built on truth. It is built on silence. And silence, enforced by fear, maintained by ritual, sealed by blade and blood, is the only shield left unbroken. What kind of strength does it take to execute the embodiment of loyalty? What does it do to a soul, a psyche, to lift a blade against a being so sacred that even the Inquisition hesitates to command them? That is the burden the Grey Knights bore in that moment. And if the execution truly occurred, it was not only the custodian who was condemned, it was the killers themselves. They were not exalted for their purity. They were broken by it. The Grey Knights are trained to endure anything. Pain, terror, the voice of the warp itself. But nothing could have prepared them for the moment they were asked to sever something that should never be severed. To kill a demon is one thing. It is grotesque. It is dangerous. But it is simple. The enemy is clear, the corruption evident. But to kill a custodian, that is to doubt the undoubtable, to enact judgment upon what was supposed to be incorruptible. That kind of act leaves scars not on the flesh, but on the soul. It is likely that those who participated in the execution never spoke of it again. Not because they were ordered to remain silent, though they undoubtedly were, but because they could not. To speak would be to relive it, to acknowledge the moment in which their loyalty became something darker, something heavier. They obeyed. Of course they obeyed. But what does obedience mean when it turns inward? There are tales, unconfirmed as all of this must be, of Grey Knights who returned from a mission in the Segmentum Solar and requested permanent seclusion in the Vault of Echoes, a place on Titan where those who have seen too much are allowed to meditate in silence for the rest of their lives. Some enter it in penance, others in trauma. These knights were never named. No honors were recorded. But for decades after, strange inscriptions appeared in the psychic residue of that place, silent screams etched into the very walls by the mental pressure of what they carried. It is said that Justicar Tharanos, a warrior of great renown, spent the final years of his life composing a single poem. One line, repeated over and over, in dozens of dialects, in a psychic cadence that echoed grief and clarity and guilt all at once. Purity is not peace. Purity is pain. No official source has verified the tale, but among the librarians of the Grey Knights, the phrase has become a quiet mantra, a recognition of the price paid when loyalty becomes a weapon. The purity demanded by the Emperor is absolute, but it is not merciful. And for the Grey Knights, purity is not a comfort. It is a blade honed against their own hearts. They do not kill because they want to. They kill because the Imperium needs them to, because no one else can. And in doing so, they surrender more of themselves than any demon ever could. This was the last stand of absolute obedience, not in a battle against chaos, not in defiance of heresy, but in the silent room where a custodian knelt and a gray knight raised a sword. That moment, that final breath, was not filled with hatred. It was filled with horror, with understanding, with the realization that to serve the Emperor is not to be good, it is to be necessary, and necessity is a cruel master. Those gray knights did not fall, they did not question, but they did carry something with them that day, a burden no litany could absolve, a memory no psychic ward could erase. And perhaps in the deepest reaches of Titan, there is a room with no name where only the most silent gather, a place where the Emperor is not praised, only mourned. The fortress monastery of the Grey Knights is not merely a citadel. It is a wound carved into the moon of Titan, a place where the veil between material and immaterial is deliberately thinned, where purity is honed to a razor's edge through relentless exposure to horror. Every hall hums with suppressed psychic resonance. Every vault is a tomb of unspoken deeds. And if the execution of a custodian ever left a mark upon the Imperium, then Titan is where its deepest scar still bleeds. The outer sanctums of the fortress remain unchanging. Libraries of forbidden texts, training chambers echoing with oaths, reliquaries housing the shattered remains of demonic entities. But beneath them lie the deeper vaults, places unnamed on any map, where the Grey Knights store not just weapons and relics, but memory. These are the echo chambers, where psychic impressions of the most traumatic missions are preserved in stasis. Entered only by librarians or justicars on the verge of ascension, these chambers are said to be so emotionally charged that unprepared minds risk psychic collapse upon entry. One such chamber is known in whispers as the Hall of One. It is silent, smaller than most, and perpetually unlit. No plaques adorn it. No records acknowledge its existence. But among the senior librarians, it is understood that within its walls lies a single psychic echo, sharper, more painful than any demonic conflict. Visitors describe the sensation of a blade being driven into their minds, a presence watching, not malevolent, but grieving. Some say the echo is that of the executed custodian. Others insist it is the soul print of the knight who struck the blow. Elsewhere on Titan, in the Librarium Occultus, a restricted sector even among restricted sectors, there exists a codex locked behind layers of thought wards and null fields. Referred to only as 10,000-1, it is said to be a psychic treatise, not written in ink, but inscribed as emotional truth, a history expressed not in words, but in guilt, grief, and unspeakable clarity. Those who have read it are not permitted to speak for 7 days, and those who try often lose the ability entirely. There are also architectural anomalies, places within the fortress where the stones do not align, where rooms exist without doors, where corridors loop back upon themselves in defiance of Euclidean space. It is said these distortions are remnants of an unsanctioned ritual, one performed to contain an event that nearly breached the veil of secrecy Titan so desperately maintains. Perhaps the execution tore reality here, or perhaps it is simply what happens when a truth too vast to bear is buried beneath centuries of willful denial. The most telling sign, however, lies not in the halls or vaults, but in the silence of certain veterans. Some among the older Grey Knights, when asked about Terra, grow still. They do not speak of battles. They do not boast of honor. They speak only of the weight that cannot be shared. Of a moment when purity demanded a price too high to pay, and yet they paid it. And in their silence, in their refusal to elaborate, they say more than any archive ever could. It is in this silence that the echoes live. So yes, Titan remembers. Not in stone, not in song, but in the quiet between steps, in the chill that crawls down the spine of a justicar when he enters the lower vaults, in the dreams of the aspirants, who sometimes wake with the image of gold shattering under silver, though they were never told the tale. In the way the Grand Masters meet each other's gaze and find a flicker of something behind the formality, not shame, but sorrow. For Titan is not just a fortress, it is a reliquary of burdens, and some burdens once accepted echo forever. The Adeptus Custodes and the Grey Knights, twin pillars of the Emperor's eternal defense. One born of his flesh, the other of his psychic will, both incorruptible, both sacred. And yet, in this single act, this execution buried beneath seals and silence, a fracture may have formed that will never truly heal. The question is not whether the Custodes know. Of course they know. Their networks of awareness reach farther and deeper than any Adepta dares guess. They know every breath within the Imperial Palace. They feel the shifts in protocol, the slight changes in command tone. Even if the Inquisition buried the incident, even if the Ordo Malleus wiped every record, the Custodes would feel the shape of the silence, and they would understand what it meant. But they would not speak of it. Not out of fear. Never fear. The Adeptus Custodes do not fear the Grey Knights. They respect them, as one might respect another blade in the Emperor's arsenal. But their own authority is not granted. It is assumed intrinsic, born of their proximity to the throne. They need not explain themselves, and in that same spirit, they would not publicly contest the action, because to do so would give it power, acknowledgement. That, above all, cannot be allowed. Yet one must wonder, what does this silence mean for the bond between the two orders? In public, the Custodes and Grey Knights have no formal alliance. They do not train together. They rarely operate in concert. Their doctrines, while similarly severe, diverge sharply. The Custodes are watchers, preservers, arbiters of the Emperor's will through action and example. The Grey Knights are enforcers, purifiers, designed to eliminate that which defies definition. But at the core of their existence lies a shared truth. The Emperor made them, and to strike down one made by the same hand is to stain that shared purpose. There are speculative reports of minor clashes, instances where Custodes denied Grey Knight landings near Terra, occasional confrontations during warp breach quarantines. Nothing recorded officially, nothing proven. But the patterns exist. A slow cooling of relations, a widening of the spiritual chasm between the golden and the silver. Not open hostility, something colder, disapproval. Some theorize that the Custodes have responded not with confrontation, but with introspection, that they have redoubled their efforts to root out impurity within their own ranks, that internal audits, long considered redundant, have intensified, that even among the 10,000 there is now a whisper of fear, not of the warp, but of what the Grey Knight's judgment implies. Others believe the opposite, that the Custodes have begun to view the Grey Knights with a new caution, a suspicion born not of rivalry, but of precedent. If the Inquisition could sanction the death of one of their own, if the Grey Knights could enact it, then who else might be subject to their blade? Has the Emperor's scalpel grown too sharp, too independent? And if so, what safeguards exist? None. That is the answer. No one checks the Grey Knights, just as no one checks the Custodes. They are truths unto themselves. But now there is doubt, and doubt in the Imperium is the seed of ruin. Imagine the unspoken conversations, a custodian and a Grey Knight passing one another in the heart of the Imperial Palace. No words, just a flicker of recognition, a nod that says, "I remember." The tension, palpable, the air charged with memory, each knowing what the other is capable of, each wondering what lines might be crossed next, and whether they too might be called to choose between silence and judgment. This is not war. It is not betrayal. It is something far more dangerous, a rift in unity. A silent divergence in purpose between two of the Emperor's most sacred creations. And like all rifts in the Imperium, it begins in whispers and ends in catastrophe. Unless, of course, it was always meant to be this way. Was it the Emperor's will? That question has haunted every echo of this event. It lingers in the thoughts of those who know and in the souls of those who suspect. Was this execution a divine command whispered through the veil to the minds of the Grey Knights? A psychic imperative born from the Golden Throne, translated not into words, but into inevitability? Or was it a deviation, a cruel fracture in the divine plan, wrought by mortals who mistook fear for clarity? In the Imperium, faith is currency. The Emperor is not merely a man, not even a god. He is the axis upon which all purpose spins. The Custodes serve him with intimate, sacred proximity. The Grey Knights were formed in the shadow of his death, sculpted from the psychic detritus of the heresy's fallout. Both claim a purity of mission that transcends politics. But only one acted. Only one chose to kill a son of the Emperor. And in that act, the question arises: did the throne allow this, or did it demand it? There are theological factions that offer conflicting visions. The Martian synods lean toward a deterministic interpretation that the Emperor's presence within the throne guided the Grey Knight's hand directly, much as the Astronomican guides ships through the warp. That in their psychic communion with his latent mind, they felt a singular, inescapable command: end the corruption, no matter the vessel. But other scholars, heretical and hidden, suggest a darker interpretation: that the Emperor cannot speak, that his will, once clear and immense, has fractured across time and torment, that what the Grey Knights heard was not command, but projection, echoes of their own fears, reflected in the throne's immeasurable psychic inertia. They acted not out of obedience, but out of terror, the terror of losing the only thing left to believe in: incorruptibility. If the Emperor did not will the execution, then what are the implications? It would mean that the most sacred of his servants have taken divine judgment into their own hands, that the psychic elite, those untouched by corruption, have begun interpreting necessity as righteousness, that there is no longer a singular will guiding the Imperium, only the pretense of one, maintained by those who must believe, or else admit that the Emperor is no longer a presence, but a memory. And what if he did will it? Then we must accept that the Emperor ordered the death of his own perfect creation, that even purity is expendable in the greater calculus, that the light of the throne is not a beacon of salvation, but a burning judgment that consumes even the most holy. In this view, the custodian's death was not a tragedy, but a sacrifice, a moment in which the Imperium's highest ideals, loyalty, honor, inviolability, were torn down and rebuilt in the crucible of necessity. There is an ancient precept buried in the teachings of the preceptor order that says, "The Emperor's will is not justice, it is survival." And perhaps that is the only truth left to cling to. The execution was not right, it was not wrong, it was necessary. And in the grim darkness of the far future, necessity is indistinguishable from divinity. But this raises a final, harrowing possibility: that the Emperor himself has changed, that his long imprisonment upon the throne, his unending vigil, has transformed him from a guiding light into a cold calculus, that the human soul, no matter how exalted, cannot remain unwarped by 10,000 years of silence. If so, then the execution was not an aberration. It was a signpost, a revelation that the Imperium's God is not merciful, not paternal. He is function made flesh, and the faith of his servants must now accept a new gospel, that even angels can be discarded, that even golden suns can be found lacking. Whether this is a curse or a divine refinement is a matter for theologians or madmen. But either way, the Imperium marches on, scarred, splintered, still loyal, and perhaps still blind. In the end, it was not just a man who died. It was a myth. The death of a custodian, not in war, not in betrayal, but in execution, is more than a tragedy. It is a tremor that shakes the bedrock of the Imperium's spiritual architecture. It is a sacrilege that cannot be undone, only buried. And in burying it, the Imperium paid a price far greater than it will ever admit. That price is not measured in blood or data or secrecy. It is measured in faith, in the slow erosion of certainty among those who must believe that some truths are unbreakable. The Custodes were supposed to be one of those truths. So were the Grey Knights. But the moment one struck down the other, a silence was born that no amount of dogma can ever fill. The Custodes continue their vigil. The Grey Knights continue their crusade. The Emperor sits in his throne, unmoving. But something has changed. The cost of maintaining the Imperium's spiritual illusion has increased. The foundation is less stable, the whispers more numerous. In a galaxy where hope is already a heresy, even the faintest crack in the illusion of inviolable loyalty spreads like a psychic cancer. And for what? To contain an idea? To prevent a truth too dangerous to live? Perhaps that was the only choice. Perhaps the Imperium must eat its own ideals to survive. But what kind of survival is that? What kind of future is built on the silence of its brightest? There are some who say that the execution of the Custodian was not an ending, but a beginning, the first sign that even the most sacred pillars of the Imperium are subject to the long decay. That obedience, no matter how absolute, can be weaponized, that loyalty can become a blade, and that in the hands of those who serve necessity, even perfection must kneel. But there are others who see something more hopeful, a glimmer of awareness in the darkness, that the Imperium, so long shackled to ritual and fear, is finally forced to confront its own fallibility, that even its greatest champions are not beyond scrutiny, that perhaps, just perhaps, there is strength to be found not in denial, but in reckoning. This event, whatever the truth behind it, stands as a testament to the cost of silence. It is the price paid for maintaining an illusion, a cost measured not only in the soul of the custodian lost, but in the hearts of those who struck him down, and in the billions who will never know why. And so we are left with questions. What else has been buried? What other truths lie beneath the surface of purity? What horrors have been sanctified in the name of survival? The day the Grey Knights executed a custodian and sealed the records is not a tale of justice or villainy. It is a parable of power, of necessity, of sacrifice. It is a story that asks not whether it was right, but whether it could ever be right. And in asking, it forces us to look into the darkest mirror the Imperium holds and see not demons, but ourselves. Thank you for watching. If you found this dive into the forbidden corners of Warhammer 40k lore compelling, subscribe for more fan theory explorations, tragic reckonings, and the stories too sacred to be told. The Imperium may hide the truth, but here we uncover it, one shadow at a time.